So hello everyone, and welcome to this video edition of V Radio. I decided to go ahead and use YouTube for this particular episode because I do not currently have the funds to activate my Blog Talk Radio account. If you would like to donate to V Radio, perhaps to get that reactivated, you can do that at my blog. v-radio.org is no longer active. So the topic that I wanted to discuss was the issues further, basically, about what's been going on with the civil rights movement, and more specifically, in what ways that the activism that has been perpetrated by members of either the feminist movement, or the racial activist movement, or the social justice movements, how they more or less contradict the Zeitgeist Movement or Venus Project approach to improving the world. And I guess it's important to clarify that just because you don't support these specific angles of activism, it doesn't mean that you therefore don't care about racial issues or gender issues. I actually prepared a blog about this topic, so perhaps rather than talking over it, I'll just go ahead and read from it. The blog was entitled "Breaking My Silence About the Current Wave of Civil Rights Activism." Some time ago, I voiced a concern that the activism on race and gender issues was headed in a direction that would divide people rather than bring them together. I was met with a lot of hostility about this from my colleagues in the Occupy movement as well as the Zeitgeist Movement and Venus Project. I reminded people who had been longtime listeners of my radio show that neither Jacques Fresco or Peter Joseph ever advocated activism that was focused on only the benefit of one particular group, and that, point of fact, the opposite was true. I remember my conversations with these issues with Jacques Fresco during my time in Venus, Florida, really well. And it wasn't until I talked to him about it in person that I was 100% sold. But Jacques explained to me that activism groups like the feminists, racial advocates, etc. find themselves in a slippery slope. You start to see the world only from the perspective of your one group you have decided to champion. You lose the ability to see the bigger picture, and oftentimes you find yourself becoming exactly what you claim to oppose, whether it's sexist, racist, etc. Such activism also tends to bring about a mindset of accentuating differences in your mind instead of eliminating them from your thinking. As in, you run around thinking in terms of race or gender, when the point of what TZM, TVB strive towards is to eliminate such artificial boundaries. Until Jacques explained all of that to me, I was more or less still in support of such activism. And to be clear, to stop being in support of it doesn't mean you don't care about racial or gender equality issues. It means you understand that these issues are symptoms of a disease, not the disease. I linked articles and videos of Jacques and Peter addressing why the Zeitgeist Movement or the Venus Project are not focused on specific race or gender issues. And I watched as activists I used to admire for their intellect scramble to make excuses or try to find ways to reinterpret what Jacques or Peter had said. It started to sadly remind me of the way conservatives try to pretend Jesus would support their points of view about welfare.
We want to absorb human beings, women's lib, all organizations that believe in a better life for man. There are no Negro problems or Polish problems or Jewish problems or Greek problems or women's problems. They're human problems.
So consider for a moment how well Fresco would have been received if he dared to utter the words "there are no Negro problems" at a Black Lives Matter rally. Now, it's important to make the distinction that obviously Jacques Fresco does believe that Black Lives Matter. That's not the issue. What is at issue is that he understands that the black problems, the women problems, etc., they're all just symptoms, and that there is a greater concern that essentially if you solve the greater concern, all of these other problems go away. They're all symptoms. So anyway, getting back to my blog, nothing made all of this more clear to me than watching racial and gender-based activism take center stage among some of my now former listeners and many former friends in the Occupy movement. And with the rise of groups like Black Lives Matter, and what would have at one time be considered more radical feminists becoming mainstream, and with the social justice warrior movement that has more basically just become akin to an inquisition, I started to see it all very clearly. First, let's start with feminism. I remember an incident where a group of ladies from the Occupy movement were exchanging congratulations as they had, through multiple protests, pressured local hotels to refuse to host a meeting for a group of activists known as MRAs. At the time, I didn't even really have any idea what an MRA was. In the context of the conversation, I sort of gathered that they felt that the MRA movement was a group of misogynists. Here in Detroit, in the Detroit area, this group was trying to have a convention of sorts, and feminists from Occupy Detroit set about protesting to see to it that any such meetings were shut down. My Facebook feed was basically blowing up with their conversations about this, arranging to set up still more protests at every hotel that might host an MRA convention or conference. So I said, ladies, I understand that you don't agree with these people, but don't you think you're starting to take this to a point you are interfering with their right to peaceably assemble? The backlash was immediate and vicious. I was set upon by these girls as if they were a rabid pack of wolves. Instantly I was a misogynist. Instantly I was an MRA. And I didn't even know what they were talking about. I was astonished, as I knew some of these girls very well. Some of them I had marched with or camped with. In the conversation that followed, I basically learned that because they didn't agree with what they felt the MRA message was, the MRA membership therefore didn't have a right to meet anywhere. And they would personally see to it that their right to peaceably assemble and engage in free speech was squelched by any means necessary. The ends justified the means. I think what I found most ironic about the incident was that by behaving like this, they were bringing far more attention to the MRA movement than that movement would have ever gotten otherwise. For instance, I had never even ever heard of them. The hatred and vitriol that was so out of control that they had become completely irrational. Witch hunt in full effect. Looking under every rock for signs of the devil. That was the first time I thought about comparing it to this.
Either you are with us, or you are with the terrorists.
There were other inequities to their approach that started to come to light. When you are focused only on furthering the agenda of one group, you inevitably create an imbalance. So, for example, while I support the idea that real women have curves, which is more or less a movement trying to suggest that women should not be forced to adhere to certain expectations of body image, I've never heard a peep from them about the fact that men go through all of this as well. Overweight men don't exactly have girls beating down their doors looking for a date. But it seems like an effort to make men ashamed for finding thin girls attractive, leaving the expectations of men to be physically fit intact. This is not equality, and it's not progress. The phenomenon of domestic violence against men becoming as invisible as domestic violence against women used to be, and very little being said about it. I watched a video from a show called What Would You Do, where they staged incidents of men abusing women in public. The reactions were swift and decisive as bystanders quickly came to the aid of women, but when they reversed the scenario and had a female beating on a male, in this show they interviewed people after they staged situations and asked them why they reacted the way they did. The women they interviewed who did nothing, while the female actress abusing the male actors in public, said things like, "I assumed he must have done something to deserve it," or "I assumed he must have cheated on her." These remarks were a chilling flashback to the same sort of garbage that used to be said by people who witnessed men abusing their wives.
I'm going to do that again. If I can track you down again. If I can find you again. Sit there. Sit there.
That really hurts. Stop.
We've seen what people do when a woman is abused by a man.
Stop.
Sit there.
Stop.
Sit there.
You look like a psychotic person.
But we wondered, what would happen if we reversed the sexes? What if the victim were a man and the abuser a woman?
Huh? You want to start with me?
This time she plays the aggressor, verbally and physically abusing her boyfriend.
How's that? How's that?
Women abusing, even assaulting their male partners. Not as isolated as you might think.
I hate you!
From Moonstruck to Shakespeare in Love to Pirates of the Caribbean, women hitting men may be a Hollywood staple, but it's not just in the movies. Major League pitcher Chuck Finley's wife, actress Tawny Kitaen, was arrested and briefly jailed after he accused her of pummeling him. She denied it and charges were dropped, but only after she agreed to attend anger management classes. Again, psychology professor Carrie Keating.
It is a big problem in this country. Men create more damage, but women hit more than men do.
Every year, there are more than 800,000 serious cases of women abusing men.
Again, nothing.
But confronted with this, what will people do when hidden cameras are rolling and our actress is out of control?
No.
One after another, people pass by and keep right on going. What will this woman do? At first, she seems to ignore the fight, but pauses a few paces down the path to watch. She tells us she didn't think this woman could pose any real physical threat.
It didn't look like any harm was being done. I didn't immediately think to protect the man at all.
But now we're about to meet a woman whose reaction is instant, visceral. Watch closely.
No, get up. No.
Why don't you calm down?
What went through her mind?
Good for her. You go, girl.
Linda Makluthi just assumed he had it coming to him. But why?
Maybe she caught him cheating or something like that, really bad, and that made her lose it.
We've seen it before, back when we taped our first experiment with that abusive boyfriend. We told our actors to trade places for just one take.
Tell me right now. Why? Why?
And later brought bystanders together to talk about what they'd seen.
My first thought was that he must have cheated on her.
I was thinking that same thing.
But you don't know that.
You don't, but...
You look guilty.
Exactly.
And now, over and over again, when the victim is a man, so many women perceive him as guilty.
I figured, well, he probably deserved it.
Linda seems to think our feisty actress is a kind of role model.
I was thinking, I'm pretty nice all the time. I should have done what she did sometimes.
But what about this guy?
You know what? Just Nate, come on!
Come on, what?
Whose side is he
You
on?
haven't said a freaking word to me about it.
We watch and record for hours and hours as 163 people just walk or jog right by.
Look at how many people went by without defending that guy. And this is kind of classic because female aggression is usually seen as not very important, not very deadly, nothing really to react to.
But just maybe things are about to change. Watch these women as they gather at a safe distance and map out a strategy. Now, one of them approaches.
Everyone wants to call the cops on you guys.
Excuse me?
Everyone wants to call the cops. You're not going to say anything?
It's actually, like, none of your business, so can you excuse me?
Oh, sorry. Well, if you need help, we'll help.
But when she retreats, they go at it again.
Look at me. Nate, stop ignoring me! What the? You're not even... Look, Nate, hello! Hello!
And that's all it takes. This woman calls 911.
911, where's your emergency?
There's two people fighting on a bench. She's like beating them up. I was wondering if somebody could come just check it out.
But what would a cop do when a woman is abusing a man?
Self-centered.
Hi, guys. Why not call 911?
What they would have, they would just have a little tiff. It'd be all right.
I'd find it upsetting. I would find it more upsetting if he were putting his hands on her.
If you're wondering why they didn't call 911, well, he's a cop.
If it had been the man...
Oh, without a doubt.
You would have stepped in.
Yeah. It's called old-fashioned views.
It's a double standard.
It is. What can I tell you? I mean, if you're raised the way I was raised, you don't put your hands on it, right?
So what should you do if you see something like that?
Every individual has to do their own calculus when it comes to whether or not they should step in and help.
The constant conversations about rape culture. Now, obviously rape is a horrible crime. But basically the idea that we supposedly live in a culture wherein rape is somehow considered acceptable. They generally talk about this in films or TV shows. What is odd about this to me is I remember growing up that writers would use rape as pretty much a surefire way to get the audience to despise a villain. It was the ultimate tool to be sure that the audience had no sympathy for a character and ensured that the audience would be watching on the edge of their seat for justice to be done, for this rapist to be killed by the protagonist in, whatever film. The thing is that if we live in this rape culture where rape is supposedly acceptable and that it's not prosecuted, that just contradicts everything I've ever seen. There are exceptions, of course, but even being exonerated on rape charges doesn't change the fact that you will be treated with that stigma for your entire life afterward. But for some reason, feminists are strangely silent when the idea comes forward to confront women who do falsely accuse men of rape.
Time 10 on your side confronts the woman accused of committing perjury that sent a man to prison for a crime he did not commit. On Friday, a Hampton judge vacated a sentence against Jonathan Montgomery. The judge found Montgomery guilty of sex crimes against Elizabeth Coast and sentenced him to a 7.5-year sentence in prison in 2008. Now, Coast recently worked with the Hampton Police Department, but after she admitted to a police detective she lied in court and sent an innocent man to prison, she was fired. Reporter Andy Fox confronted Coast outside the Hampton court.
I'm Andy Fox, Miss Coast, and I want to know why you lied. I want to know why you lied and put a man in a prison for 4 years and committed perjury. I want to know why you lied and put Mr. Montgomery in prison. Do you have anything to say to him? Your lie put him in prison for 4 years.
Now, Coast was given a court-appointed attorney and a new court date. We're told that is a conflict because the public defender's office appointed to represent her is the same office that now represents Montgomery. Montgomery remains in prison because he has to file a writ of innocence in order for the Court of Appeals to legally free him. We will have more for you on this story tonight at 5.
Now, logically speaking, if the issue at hand is that supposedly people are not taking rape seriously enough, then you would think that one of the biggest motivations on the part of feminist activists would be to confront women who use this stigma as a weapon for whatever personal reasons they have. And more to the point, if supposedly we live in this rape culture where rape is not important or not considered to be bad, then why would it even be worth lying about? Well, the problem is that that's the opposite is true. In fact, if you say that somebody raped you, the attention that you get is incredible, and you should be, of course. You should be taken care of. You should be protected. But we don't live in a culture that doesn't do that, and they're aware of that. Accusing somebody of rape it has an immense amount of power behind it because, once again, we don't actually live in a rape culture. And similarly, there was another incident. People can lie about domestic violence. And once again, it cheapens all of the experiences of the actual victims of domestic violence. But you don't hear anything from feminist activists about that. They're not interested in talking about that. They're not interested in discussing the inequities of the situation.
So you didn't do anything wrong here?
I don't feel like I did, no. I mean, he took, my love and the vows that I made to him when we got married and totally tromped all over that for the first year of our marriage. Disrespected me, disrespected my home, disrespected our marriage.
Okay, I understand why you feel justified for putting him in jail. I'm just asking if you ran a red light in putting him in jail. Did you make statements that weren't true?
I may have said that there was punching or hitting, and there was not that to my recollection.
You
but there was
maybe say it. You either said it or you didn't. You either said he hit me and punched me, or you didn't. Did you say
I did.
You did.
I did.
And did he hit you and punch you?
No.
Okay.
Not to my recollection.
You knew it wasn't true when you said it, though. I mean, let's be honest.
Yes.
You knew it wasn't true when you said it, right?
Yes.
So you made a conscious decision to embellish the story.
Yes.
And that's a lie. I'm not saying this isn't the biggest creep in the world and you shouldn't divorce him before dark today. I'm not saying that. And I'm not saying that he's not mentally abusive, emotionally abusive, verbally abusive, and even physically abusive. He may deserve to be under the jail. I'm not saying that you should put up with that at all under any theory whatsoever. What I'm asking you is, did you or did you not file a false police report when you said that he punched you and hit you, and you knew at the time that he did not?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a long way of coming around to saying, yeah, I lied to the police and got put in jail.
Now, there's also this belief that everything is an example of the patriarchy. Even women getting better treatment in family court is supposed to be the system trying to enforce male dominance. Having gone through family court, I remember very clearly all of the women behind the desks looking at me with indignation when I showed up to file motions because of the various things my ex-wife was doing. And I remember basically she was pretty much permitted to do anything she wanted with no fear of reprisal. I also remember how they would often ask how far behind I was on child support. The reason they tend to ask this if you were a man and delinquent on child support, they are hoping to have you arrested on the spot. When I would point out to them that it was my ex-wife who was like over $8,000 behind, they would suddenly lose interest in the topic of child support. In all my interactions with family court, I by no means ever felt like the system was trying to help me, but feminists will tell you that even this is just somehow an example of the patriarchy. There are even more extreme voices in the feminist movement that call for actions like curfews on men, or having men surgically altered to lower their sex drives. This reminds me like far too much of the genital mutilation of women in Africa, or during the Victorian era to try to control women's sex drives. But this notion of the hypocrisy of the situation just does not occur to them. The slippery slope manifests itself in stories like the feminist teacher who forbade her boys' students from playing with Legos in the name of gender equality. Apparently, to her understanding, playing with Legos helped brain development, and she couldn't get the female students to play with the blocks. So the solution was to deny boys access to the blocks, even going so far as to lie to the boys and tell them that they would be allowed to play with them. Effectively, this teacher decided it was better to prevent the boys in the classroom from fully developing their brains to ensure that they didn't get any advantages over the female students in her classroom who just didn't want to play with Legos. So let's just read a little bit of this article. Bainbridge Island, Washington, from CBS Seattle. A kindergarten teacher in Washington state is banning the use of Legos among her male students in the name of gender equity. Bainbridge Island Review reports that Captain Johnston Blakely, elementary teacher Karen Keller, doesn't allow male students to play with the blocks in order to encourage use among females. She even makes up excuses sometimes to set her agenda in order. Quote, I always tell the boys, you're going to have a turn, and I'm like, yeah, when hell freezes over in my head. Kellen told the Bainbridge Island Review. I tell them, you'll have a turn, because I don't want them to feel bad. Keller says she started doing this because boys were flocking to the colorful blocks during their free choice playtime, while girls tended to play with dolls or crayons. Keller hopes by blocking the use of the toys for boys that female students may be encouraged to play with them. The teacher says that the Lego play helps with developmental acceleration and math skills, while dolls offer little challenge or opportunity for growth. She first used pink and purple Legos to try to attract the girls to play with the toys, but she found this ineffective. Soon after, she requested funds from the school to purchase a Lego Education Community Starter Kit. She did not tell the school officials that access to the toys would be denied for male students. Quote, I had to do the Lego-only club, girls' Lego-only club, to boost it more, Keller said. Boys get ongoing practice and girls are shut out of those activities, which just kills me. Until girls get it into their system that building is cool, building is what I want to do, I want to protect that. Keller says the practice is fair because she's giving different students the tools they need to succeed. She says, I just feel like we are still so far behind in promoting gender equity. So again, basically the solution apparently is just to hinder the brain development of boys so that it doesn't get ahead of that of girls. And that's an example of just something that a well-meaning activist who's caught up in this kind of thinking would do. She honestly thinks she's doing a good thing, when the truth of the matter is there's nothing good about what she's doing. But when you're caught up in this idea that you're only thinking about the benefits of one side, one issue, one group, it's very easy to become irrational and just do flat-out stupid things. With racial activists, the issue is similar. Everything becomes about the issue of their race and its struggles above all else. At Occupy, this manifested in actions like ensuring that no white males would be permitted to speak to the press on behalf of Occupy Detroit. Black Lives Matter protests are becoming more and more excluding in the way they do things. White activists are second-class activists, and some BLM organizers would rather white people didn't show up to their protests at all. Recently, a BLM organizer was videotaped instructing all of the white activists who had showed up to a march with them in support that they were to be taking up positions at the back of the march, as it was a black march. This is not something Martin Luther King would have ever done.
I need all white people to move to the back. This is a black and brown resistance march.
Parks would like that. Oh, yeah.
All up in here. If you are for this march and you are here to support, you will appropriately take your place in the back of this march.
Oh, yeah.
It was truly led by
Wasn't
the
it wrong
black
with
and
Rosa
brown
Parks?
community.
That's right.
That's it.
That's right.
This ain't the time for us to question if not we allies or if we sleeping or fucking one of y'all. This ain't the point. This ain't the time. This ain't the place. Take our rightful positions and get behind us.
That's right. Black people must be our own leaders.
So if y'all see any white folks, direct them to the back of the crowd. How about you leave then? How about you leave? That includes media. You can get the fuck out of the black media. That includes media. They only black media. Get the fuck out. That includes media. I need all of y'all to get back. I need all of y'all to get back. You mean you can get the all of y'all to get back? White media, get to the back. Black media, come to the front. White media, use for you. Use for us. Somebody can tell this person to get to the back. Yo, somebody can tell this person to get to the back. Y'all ass up. You're not for this anti bullshit today. Get to the back or you will be out from this fucking march. We are not afraid to put people out. We are not afraid to put people out. White people to the back. Black people to the front. That includes white people will not be getting out of struggle. Don't get them. They got people. You can't respect it. Go home. To the back.
So did you hear the part where they said if you don't like it, you can get the fuck out? What about the part where they said, we are not afraid to put people out? What do you think that means? It means they are not afraid to use violence to put the white people where they feel they belong. Now, I have been told that the justification of this was apparently that white people have a tendency to talk over black activists or try to draw attention to themselves during black protests. Basically, like they try to center the issue back on themselves. And that supposedly the Black Lives Matter movement is above these sorts of things. The problem is, well...
Pride Toronto organizers invited the protest group Black Lives Matter to march as honored guests in this year's parade.
Shut it down! Shut it down!
About two-thirds of the way along the route, the invited protest group held a protest, a mid-intersection sit-in stopping the parade. They threatened to stay put until Pride Toronto organizers signed a list of demands that included excluding police force floats and booths from Pride.
We are not telling individual cops and individuals that they can't participate. What we are saying is that the presence of 7 police forces creates an unsafe situation for a number of marginalized communities.
Pride Toronto's executive director and its co-chair showed up to sign the demands and get the parade going after a half-hour delay.
I believe that we just won!
Black Lives Matter participants celebrated what seemed like a win. But Pride Toronto's co-chair saw their demands as a starting point for discussions.
My reaction was to listen to them, to hear what they had to say, and to look at how we explore further conversation to meet their requests.
Today, Black Lives Matter organizers said they fully expected Pride Toronto to take that approach.
We're not surprised, and I think that there's going to be a lot of negotiations, and I think there's going to be a lot of hard lines set from our end.
Local and national police forces have been participating in Toronto Pride for years. Today, the head of the association that represents Toronto officers expressed disappointment Pride Toronto signed the document.
We feel that we were thrown under the bus, and if that's the case, that they had no intent or they just wanted to keep the parade moving, they need to deal with it, and they need to deal with it now, and they need to offer our members and all police an apology.
The Black Lives Matter protesters also demanded more funding and guaranteed space for Pride events involving Black youth and Indigenous people who are LGBT. They also said everyone should remember that Toronto's Pride Parade itself began 35 years ago as a protest march. Ron Charles, CBC News, Toronto.
So after suggesting that white people should have to walk to the back of marches because they might, try to make the subject of the march about themselves or draw attention away from the black people in the march, it's apparently completely acceptable for Black Lives Matter to decide that their issues are more important than the gay rights issues that were brought up in the Gay Pride Parade. Now, maybe this was just an isolated incident. Maybe this has just never happened before. Well, think again.
I was really nervous to get up here because there's a lot of white people in the crowd. And that wasn't a joke. I wish this many people came out to our racial demonstrations and our Black Lives Matter movement.
Come on. How are you?
Well, I don't want to stand up here and be angry because this isn't for me and this isn't for you. It's for the people that we lost and the people we may lose tomorrow and the people we lost yesterday. But I thought I'd take the moment to just list out some facts that many of you probably don't know because you're white. I'm tired of the black and white dichotomy that happens every time we talk about race or anything that goes on in our country, but we never take the time to consider the shades in between, like mine. And as much as it is awesome that there's so many people here today, but it's like, who are you really here for? So,
Whoa.
Hey, no. We are not here to blame everybody. We are here to support. Sir, I ask you to please,
so much.
just please.
I love you so much right now for getting up here.
They're segregating us. Right there on stage, they're segregating us as a community.
This is still public property. And
they are segregating us.
Can he not? Can we not have a disagreement? We had an agreement with the people on stage.
Because
so
they are making it a racial issue.
What was your intention in coming here today?
My intention was that we need to heal. We're all hurt. But I'm tired of our community, and when I say community, not only the GLBTQ community here, but also our community in Columbia, our community on Mizzou, that everything has to be divided into color, into race.
There is such a division instead of unity. You always hear about diversity.
The slippery slope basically takes you in a direction where, as I said earlier, you run the risk of becoming that which you oppose. You find yourself justified in doing things that you would have pointed to as signs of your own oppression if they were done to you. And another way that it manifested recently were the actions of a young black woman who confronted a white student for having dreadlocks, threatening to cut off his hair. Looks over to her associate and says, "Do you have any scissors?" And citing cultural appropriation. When the white student tries to leave the conversation, she physically grabs him and tried to force him to continue the conversation. Then she says that he had put his hands on her. If it were not for the fact that she was unknowingly being filmed from a bystander's phone, she easily could have sold that very fiction to the public. She could have claimed, well, he put his hands on me, and that would have been the assumption, basically claiming that he had assaulted her in some way. The thing is, if a white student ever dared to threaten to cut a black person's hair for, say, making it straight, and then physically restrain that black person when they wanted to leave, it would be cause for protest marches. So basically, you have to consider that.
You're saying that I can't have a hairstyle because of your culture? Why?
Because it's my culture. Do you know what belongs to me?
Do you know it was an Egyptian culture? Are you Egyptian? Nah, bro, you're not.
Are you Egyptian?
No, but it doesn't matter.
Wait, where's Egypt? Tell me.
You know what, girl?
Where's Egypt?
Dude, girl, you have no right to tell me what I can not get. Huh?
Where's Egypt?
Yo, girl, stop touching me right now.
Yo, girl, stop touching me right now. Come back.
Get off of me.
Come back. You put your hands on me, you'll learn.
Well, what? Like, you gonna make such some shit because of what the hair I have? That's no reason, yo. I don't need your disrespect. I don't need your disrespect.
Why are you filming this?
Just for everyone's safety.
So again, it's that slippery slope. She thought she was completely justified. in more or less victimizing someone else. You know, that the whole thing honestly was really disturbing to me. I mean, you look at the smug way she was acting in the situation, like she was completely justified in doing anything she wanted, up to and including grabbing him. You know, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. You become what you oppose. That is the same kind of garbage that, well, actually, you know, it could have even been worse, you know, but still, it's the same kind of racist garbage that she supposedly is an activist against. Now, it also manifests in violence against white people, bigotry against white people, racism against white people. But to clear themselves of any hypocrisy, they just try to lie a new definition of racism into being, wherein black people are exempt from being called racist. They suggest that someone has to have power in order to be racist, or whatever other crap. But, you know, you can point out to them that there are plenty of poor, white trash racists in the South who don't have any form of institutional power whatsoever, who are still quite racist. But they basically are not willing to apply that same logic to white racists. It's just a way to get themselves out of being called racist. And it's counterproductive. It just serves to alienate people. And the agendas of the people behind the curtain in this situation actually terrify me.
Now, how do I know that the white people know that we are going to come up with a solution to the problem? I know it because they have retina scans, they have what they call racial profiling, DNA banks, and they're monitoring our people to try to prevent the one person from coming up with the one idea. And the one idea is how we are going to exterminate white people, because that, in my estimation, is the only conclusion I have come to. We have to exterminate white people off of the face of the planet to solve this problem. Now, I don't care whether you clap or not, but I'm saying to you that we need to solve this problem because they are going to kill us. And I will leave on that. So we have to just set up our own system and stop playing and get very serious and not be diverted from coming up with a solution to the problem. And the problem on the planet is white people.
Be hard to follow that one. You can get.
So that's right, folks. Apparently even that guy is not a racist. He can't be a racist because his people have no power. I wonder if, like, they ever actually got the power to move forward on this genocidal agenda, if then they would suddenly be racist. Like, at what point, you know, the power could shift that they could be racist, in their eyes anyway. I honestly do believe that it's necessary to address issues, for example, like systemic racism, etc., as far as, like, the racist people using the system to enact racist policies. The problem is you don't need to change the definition of the word racism to get to that. Racist people could certainly use the institution towards a racist agenda if that's what they wanted to do, but it doesn't need to become a new form of racism. And more importantly, you don't have to have any form of institutional power to be a racist. Racism is a belief that one race is superior to another, or that, you know, a certain race has certain characteristics. That's what racism is. And there's no special subtext in there for must have power. And they basically just do this so that they can behave entirely as racist, so they can engage in hatred and bigotry and prejudice and get themselves completely off the hook. I've talked about this on previous episodes of the radio, and I guess I don't really have to go over it too much more. But regardless, apparently even that guy isn't racist. You know, the one asking for genocide. And there's also a guy you can look up, you know, calling for the killing of white babies. Apparently he's not racist either. But anyway, the slippery slope is there. You know, I watch up basically as people get caught up in these movements, they are highly based on emotions rather than rational thinking, and it has the effect of slowly radicalizing activists more and more. You watch as it becomes more and more common to refer to what white people do and what men do. The total hypocrisy of the situation is lost on them. And basically, if you are white or male, or particularly if you're a white male, your point of view is automatically weighed lower in all, basically matters of civil rights discussions, if you're not just simply outright told you are not allowed to speak on the matter at all. I think the most insidious way it manifested itself was when I watched as the voters in Detroit and Flint overwhelmingly voted for Hillary Clinton. Considering that the signing of NAFTA by Bill Clinton was perhaps the single act that had the most to do with the destruction of the economy in these two cities of Michigan, considering that Hillary voted for the Iraq War, referred to black people as super predators, etc., all of that was irrelevant. And never mind the fact that Bernie Sanders was arrested as a young activist for handcuffing himself to a black girl during a protest against segregation, that he marched with Martin Luther King while Hillary was working for the Goldwater campaign and opposing the Civil Rights Act. None of that mattered. Why? Can't vote for a white male over a female, period. White male bad, woman good. The sheer lunacy of that situation. I was just astonished at how it all went down. Bernie Sanders ended up winning Michigan, but the fact that Hillary overwhelmingly won in Detroit and Flint boggled my mind. But then again, those people were racist and sexist against white people and against males, and particularly white males. Acts of violence against white people by black people are dealt with in an apologist way, or simply marginalized. When you bring up the suffering that any white person may have at one point dealt with, they quickly dismiss it, as black people always have it worse. I asked for clarity in that situation once, and it was clearly explained to me that because the black suffering was worse, the white suffering didn't matter. My response to that was to bring up that, Arab lives matter. The average citizen of Iraq would give their right hand for what the average person of color in the United States deals with. Yes, some people were shot unjustly, and that's obviously horrible. But when was the last time a drone showed up and incinerated everyone at your wedding? Hell, do you have running water? But you don't see these people want to acknowledge that. Their issues are the only issue. The other consequence of this activism is now even actual criminals who happen to be people of color are victims if they are shot. Martin Luther King used to say that he looked forward to the day that men and women would be judged not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. But now, if you are white, a host of judgments are headed your way. The gender identity activists have their own issues, including terms like die cis scum and the vilifying of people who happen to have been born in the gender they prefer. There tends to be one unified theme: don't be a cisgendered straight white male.
You're fucking a white male! You're a white man! No!
Now, when you bring up the more extreme actions of feminists, racial activists, gender identity activists, or sexual orientation activists, these matters are quickly deflected. Those people don't speak for us, etc., etc. The problem is you never see any of these activists calling radical feminists out for calling for the surgical alteration of men to lower their sex drives. You never see them, calling out women for physically abusing men. You never see any of these activists decrying violence met out by black people, supposedly motivated by racial injustice when they target innocent white people. They can simply dodge all of that by saying, but we don't support those actions or believe what they believe. Yet, for some reason, if you happen to be a cisgendered straight white male, you're not allowed to say that you don't support bigotry or racism. It's understood that you are racist, sexist, homophobic, and transphobic. Automatically. And not unlike the Inquisition sniffing under every rock looking for witches, these activists can tell you that you are under the influence of the invisible devil, even if you have no idea. Because to them, you're automatically racist even if you don't know it. You're automatically sexist even if you don't know it. You're automatically homophobic even if you don't know it. You're automatically transphobic even if you don't know it. Because they have invented a new theory that apparently you are automatically unconsciously racist, sexist, etc. The establishment was at one time very threatened by the Occupy movement, and for a time we were all united under that banner. Different races, creeds, etc. But now we are more fractured than ever before. In the Zeitgeist, TVP movement, there are activists that are insisting we can't move forward with an RBE until this race, gender, sexual identity, sexual orientation issue is solved to their liking, putting the symptom before the disease. It's like saying you refuse to allow surgery to remove a brain tumor until you cure the headache. They also continue to insist that institutional racism is the cause of all of our economics problems, but rather than considering that just about everything that they identify as institutional racism goes on in countries where there are no white people to blame everything on. There is also a very real agenda to alienate us from the police force. I've seen some pretty idiotic things suggested, like abolishing the police force. There is so much energy given to motivate people to think of the police as their enemy, and to view that all police as the same. This also plays into the agenda of the elite, because if there is ever a real uprising of the poor against the wealthy, they need a police force to be their stormtroopers in any coming conflict. And the more the elite can get us to behave exactly as we are stereotyped, the easier it is to get police officers on board with fascist agendas. The more we behave like terrorists, the more they will be apt to believe the propaganda they will be fed when it's time to haul people off to the camps. Apparently, some activists believe that the best way to handle police profiling their race or group as criminals is to riot and behave like criminals. The best way to handle police wrongly believing that they are a threat is to chant slogans like pigs in a blanket, fry them like bacon, or what do we want? Dead cops. When do we want them? Now. When one Black Lives Matter chapter organized a barbecue gathering so that the local police could meet with them and in a unified event to promote peace and understanding, that event was rejected by a lot of Black Lives Matter activists. You would think that that would be actually exactly what they would want to see, which would be peace between the police and people of color. But some of these people, it seems like they really want to just maintain this enemy status. Like, it's really important to them to do that. And I think actually there's a good reason for that, and that's because extremism in of itself is addictive.
Seriously though, we've heard a lot about extremism recently, a nastier, harsher atmosphere everywhere, more abuse and bother boy behavior, less friendliness and tolerance and respect for opponents. All right, but what we never hear about extremism is its advantages. Well, the biggest advantage of extremism is that it makes you feel good, because it provides you with enemies. Let me explain. The great thing about having enemies is that you can pretend that all the badness in the whole world is in your enemies, and all the goodness in the whole world is in you. Attractive, isn't it? So, if you have a lot of anger and resentment in you anyway, and you therefore enjoy abusing people, then you can pretend that you're only doing it because these enemies of yours are such very bad persons. And that if it wasn't for them, you'd actually be good-natured and courteous and rational all the time. So, if you want to feel good, become an extremist. Okay, now you have a choice. If you join the hard left, they'll give you their list of authorized enemies. Almost all kinds of authority, especially the police, the city, Americans, judges, multinational corporations, public schools, furriers, newspaper owners, fox hunters, generals, class traitors, and, of course, moderates. Or, if you'd rather be an extremist on the hard right, no problem, fine, you still get a lovely list of enemies, only they're different ones. Noisy minority groups, unions, Russia, weirdos, demonstrators, welfare sponges, meddlesome clergy, peaceniks, the BBC, strikers, social workers, communists, and, of course, moderates. And upstart actors. Now, once you're armed with one of these super lists of enemies, you can be as nasty as you like and yet feel your behaviors morally justified. So you can strut around abusing people and telling them you could eat them for breakfast and still think of yourself as a champion of the truth, a fighter for the greater good, and not the rather sad paranoid schizoid that you really are.
Now, updating that video for modern times, we could, of course, add to the list of enemies for the right, we could add Muslims and gays, and for the left, we can add white people, males, and particularly white males to the left enemies. Honestly, that video wouldn't be so funny if it wasn't so true, and that's, I think, kind of at the core of why so many of these people, they seem to really need this conflict. Like, it's so addictive to have these enemies that you can blame everything on and just continue to run around abusing people, as he said, and feel like, well, you're morally justified. And so basically, that video, while theoretically, I guess, is supposed to be a parody, he's really telling the truth, Now, anyway, so the people who suggest abolishing the police force really make me laugh. I grew up in those neighborhoods. There are people that are far more dangerous than the police who would absolutely love a world absent the police force. And I assure you, you don't want them running things. If you would like a theatrical trailer of what that would be like, you can check out The Warlords in Somalia. Classism is real. The wealthy collude to keep themselves wealthy and the poor, poor. They don't actually give a damn about race, but it is a useful tool to keep the poor from uniting. Get the poor white folks, waving Confederate flags and wearing white robes and blaming all of their problems on the Negro. Get all the poor black people saying black power and calling for the extermination of white people. Race is bullshit. Culture is real. Racial issues, gender issues, etc., all a distraction to keep us, basically looking for that devil in each other, while the real devil sits looking down on us from their penthouse suites, laughing as we fight one another. When race is not available, they divide by gender, or by religion, or by sexual orientation, or by political parties that they created, or movements that they brought into being. It's all a sham. It's all an illusion, and every time you talk about race, gender, sexual orientation, or sexual identity as if it is anything more than an adjective, you are contributing to the illusion. You become part of the matrix. You enforce the matrix.
Now, to balance the scale, I'd like to talk about some things that bring us together. Things that point out our similarities instead of our differences. Because that's all you ever hear about in this country is our differences. That's all the media and the politicians are ever talking about, the things that separate us, things that make us different from one another. That's the way the ruling class operates in any society. They try to divide the rest of the people. They keep the lower and the middle classes fighting with each other so that they, the rich, can run off with all the fucking money. Fairly simple thing, happens to work. Anything different, that's what they're going to talk about. Race, religion, ethnic and national background, jobs, income, education, social status, sexuality, anything they can do, keep us fighting with each other so that they can keep going to the bank. You know how I describe the economic and social classes in this country? The upper class keeps all of the money, pays none of the taxes. The middle class pays all of the taxes, does all of the work. The poor are there just to scare the shit out of the middle class. Keep them showing up at those jobs.
People caught up in this bullshit literally spend their time analyzing every movie, every song, every social media post, every social interaction, looking for any sign of the devil. I have watched as people become infected by it. It starts to dominate in color how they see literally everything. They spend so much time focused on that, in that. The elite can just keep on trucking. The elite can just keep on raising the wealth gap, keep on taking our young people to war, keep destroying the environment, and keep laughing all the way to the bank, just like George just pointed out. Nothing terrifies the elite, the men behind the curtain, more than a unified poor who figures out who the real bad guy is. A population of poor people who no longer measure themselves by skin color, by their gender, their sexual orientation, by their religion, or their sexual identity. A unified population who comes together to realize who has really been the source of their suffering, and now stands up together as one unified group intent on removing them from their positions of power. That's what they're really scared of. So stop being duped. Stop helping them divide us. You are standing in the way of the future by holding us all in the past. The path forward is colorblind, gender neutral, and does not consider anyone's sexual orientation or identity when interacting with anyone else. Because we are all human. We're all one. We're all made of the same star stuff.
I am not black. I mean, that's what the world calls me, but it's not me. I didn't come out of my mother's womb saying, "Hey everybody, I'm black." No, I was taught to be black. And you were taught to call me that, along with whatever you call yourself. It's just a label. See, from birth, the world force feeds us these labels. And eventually we all swallow them. We digest and accept the labels, never ever doubting them. But there's one problem. Labels are not you and labels are not me. Labels are just labels. But who we truly are is not skin deep. See, when I drive my car, no one would ever confuse the car for me. Well, when I drive my body, why do you confuse me for my body? It's my body. Get it? Not me. Let me break it down. See, our bodies are just cars that we operate and drive around. The dealership we call society decided to label mine the black edition, yours the Irish or white edition. And with no money down, 0% APR, and no test drive, we were forced to own these cars for the rest of our lives. Forgive me, but I fail to see the logic or pride in defining myself or judging another by the cars we drive. Because who we truly are is found inside. Listen, I'm not here to tell you how science has concluded that genetically we're all mixed and race in the human species doesn't exist, or how every historian knows that race was invented in the 15th century to divide people from each other and it has worked perfectly. No, I'm not here to lecture. I just want to ask one question. Who would you be if the world never gave you a label? Never gave you a box to check? Would you be white, black, Mexican, Asian, Native American, Middle Eastern, Indian? No. We would be one. We would be together. No longer living in the era of calling human beings black people or white people. These labels that will forever blind us from seeing a person for who they are, but instead seeing them through the judgmental, prejudicial, artificial filters of who we think they are. And when you let an artificial label define yourself, then my friend, you have chosen smallness over greatness and minimized yourself, confined and divided yourself from others. And it is an undeniable fact that where there is division, there will be conflict, and conflict starts wars. Therefore, every war has started over labels. It's always us versus them. So the answer to war, racism, sexism, and every other ism is so simple that every politician has missed it. It's the labels. We must rip them off. Isn't it funny how no baby is born racist, yet every baby cries when they hear the cries of another, no matter the gender, culture, or color, proving that deep down we were meant to connect and care for each other. That is our mission, and that is not my opinion. That is the truth in a world that has sold us fiction. Please listen, labels only distort our vision, which is why half of those watching this will dismiss it or feel resistance and conflicted. But just remember, so did the caterpillar before it broke through its shell and became the magnificent butterfly. Well, these labels are our shells, and we must do the same thing so we can finally spread our wings. Human beings were not meant to be slapped with labels like groceries and supermarkets. DNA cannot be regulated by the FDA. We were meant to be free, and only until we remove them all and stop living and thinking so small will we be free to see ourselves and each other for who we truly are. So what can we do in the face of all this madness and chaos? What is the solution? We can love. Trying to control the mind is like trying to flatten out water. You just make more waves.
So to close out this video, I hope you enjoyed it. It pretty much took me an entire day to put it together. If you'd like to donate, I will put the basically in the comment, or rather in the description, the link to the blog. It's my original V Radio blog, which is pretty much serving as the website for V Radio for the time being. I'd really appreciate it. Any and all donations that I receive at this point will basically go towards my kids and their sports and their extracurricular activities, because that's the only thing I'm having trouble really affording at this point. I know that some of the things I said here are going to ruffle some feathers, but I just couldn't stand by anymore and not say more on this topic, because I see that it's dividing and conquering us, and I hope that some people learn from this. And anyway, thanks again for tuning in, and I hope to hear from you soon.